Even though I have both volumes of the IDW Transformers Premiere Collection, I still wanted to get all the IDW Collection hardcovers as well. I just can't stand having all of a collection but missing a few, even though I already own the material in another format. So that led me to buy the IDW Collection Phase 1 Volume 1. I waited to get this until I could get Volume 2 first, since that one seemed to be elusive, rarely for sale, and overly expensive when it was. Then the 29 reprints happened and I managed to snag it. Now that I had one of the rarest books in the collection, I started to get the rest, starting at the beginning with Phase 1 Volume 1. As I explained in my overview of the Premiere Collection books, the two main differences between those and the IDW Collection is the format and the ordering. The size is different, with the Premiere Collection being closer to the size of a DC Absolute, I think, although I don't have one to compare it to, and the phase books being more the size of a normal oversized hardcover or omnibus. Even though they are technically oversized, they don't feel oversized when I'm reading them for some reason. Maybe it's because I've got used to reading Omnis, but even compared to the Power Rangers hardcovers, these just don't seem as big. Granted, these books aren't as thick, maybe that's it, but I think the pages are just a hair smaller than on a normal oversized hardcover, and I think that's the real reason it seems smaller than an oversized hardcover. Where the Premiere Collections printed the Transformers comics in release order, the phase books reorganised the stories in a mix of chronological order and reading order, with the goal being that it's easier for the reader to understand and take in the story over all the volumes. They also have these snazzy ribbons for bookmarking, although for some reason these were removed from the 2019 reprints. One final thing to note is that they don't have dust jackets, which is something I always find disappointing, but since they don't have dust jackets and are from what's generally considered an indie publisher, despite the fact that they've been around for 20 years and have quite a few hits under their belt, including Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and G.I. Joe, they're right at home on my shelf sitting next to my Power Rangers books because they too have no dust jackets and come from an indie publisher. Everything that's in this book is contained in the two Premiere books, so I've already read this once, but I reread all the stories in this book so I could take them in chronological order to see if it was better. To be honest, I had no issues with the way the Premiere Collection books read. Not everything was explained at once in those books, but it didn't need to be because it opened up more stories as it went along and left a bit of mystery, leaving room for even more stories set in the past. And I think the idea of printing stories in collections in chronological order is stupid unless the story has completely finished, because it means eventually if they go back to do a prequel story, that will inevitably be contained in a later book, so the books are no longer in chronological order, defying the purpose of the ordering of these books altogether. But that's what they decided to do, and so now we have the IDW Collection Phase 1 and Phase 2 books. The first story in the book is Megatron Origins, which is 4 issues, and it shows how Megatron became the bad guy we all love to hate. He's an energon miner on some outpost when Senator Decimus arrives from Cybertron and announces the shutdown of the operation, but one of the miners sees it for what it is and publicly speaks out against the Senator, claiming they're not really shutting the operation down, just replacing the Transformers with non-sentient robots. I thought this was quite interesting because even though this was written nearly 15 years ago, it does mirror what we're facing now, with Amazon replacing delivery drivers with drones, but it was also relevant then with more and more companies choosing to switch to automatic production rather than manual, and that gave the reader a connection to Megatron. He's being replaced and won't be able to fend for himself. When the worker speaks out, he gets attacked by the Senator's guards and killed, and Megatron is one of the Transformers that cries out against the Transformers' freedom of speech being removed. One of the Senator's guards activates a symbol on his chest, and it's the Autobots logo, and asks the people if they can now see he was trying to help them, and this sparks a massive revolt where Megatron ends up killing one of the guards and gets arrested. This was fantastic writing because it no longer shows Megatron as just a bad guy who wants everything. Now he has a reason to hate the Autobots and anyone who stands behind that logo. It's a symbol of oppression to him. I always hate when they humanise these fantastic bad characters from the 80s. Vader didn't need it in the prequels to love him in the OT. Skeletor should never have a particularly deep backstory. They're bad guys and we hate them for it. It's that simple. But I think they nailed Megatron's deep-seated hatred of the Autobots here. From his point of view, he stands for freedom against the Autobots' oppression. That's a hell of a good backstory. So Megatron is taken to a holding facility on Cybertron and escapes, then makes it to the worst area on Cybertron, where he joins an illegal cage match operation to survive, and this is where he gets used to killing. He starts networking here and building up his future allies, and eventually the Autobots send in Sentinel Prime and his forces to shut down the operation, and when Megatron defends it, Soundwave appears and offers him weapons to use in any way he sees fit. It turns out Soundwave works for Senator Ratbat, and it's really hard for me to say Ratbat instead of Rat Trap because he was in Beast Wars. And this senator has been stockpiling his own stores of Energon, despite the fact that there's a huge shortage. Megatron's had enough of the corruption in the government, and along with Starscream, his brothers, and the rest of the new Decepticons, attacks a parade that's being thrown for Senator Decimus, kidnaps him, wreaks havoc, and has his Decepticons burn his new logo over the massive Autobot logo, sending a message to all the Transformers on Cybertron that the corrupt senators and Autobots' days are numbered. It was the Decepticon logo, and this was their first appearance. This is the true start of the war on Cybertron, so it makes sense that it's the first story in the book, since this is where literally everything begins, and it makes sense that it ties in with Megatron. Megatron's forces continue to conduct guerrilla warfare on the Autobots, attacking their industrial sector security forces, the mass murder of workers in the corporate sector, planting bombs, disrupting resources, and attacking transport centres. Essentially, they're terrorists. At a secret meeting, Megatron tells his new recruits that they can use all of Cybertron as their battleground, and not just the ring anymore, when Sentinel Prime and the Autobot forces raid his hideout and arrests all of the Decepticons, including Megatron and Starscream. In the cells, Starscream appears to have betrayed Megatron by saying he's willing to tell the council his plans in exchange for his freedom, and I thought that was a nice nod to his history as a character, and I'm not ashamed to say I totally bought into it, because that's exactly what Starscream does literally all the time. But really, it's all part of Megatron's plan, and when Starscream gets taken to the council chambers, he uses his new guns to attack the senators, mark the Decepticon logo on the wall, and freeze all the inmates who then choose to become Decepticons, and Soundwave brings a box of weapons, and this is where we finally get to see Megatron with his shoulder cannon. Sentinel Prime arrives to take on Megatron with his awesome looking Apex armour, but it's not enough to beat him, and he kills Sentinel Prime. Seeing his body, the other Autobots retreat, and the comic ends with Megatron the victor having taken the city and planning his next move to take all of Cybertron. The art was good, but very stylised. Sometimes the inking was very heavy, very thick, which gave the art a nice effect, but I found the thick lines combined with the colours to be very muddy and quite often dark, and the combination of all three made it hard to tell what was going on sometimes. I've seen these comics on a tablet and they look a lot better there. There's practically no muddiness at all because of the backlight. And since this is very clearly digital art, I can only guess that the artist had no idea that this would be so difficult to tell what was going on when it was transferred to physical paper. To make matters worse, sometimes the art is confined to these really tiny boxes, which really doesn't help matters. That being said, I did like the artwork mostly, it was just let down in these areas. The big images look fantastic though, especially that last page with Megatron, or any page where he's fighting or he looks angry. He looks awesome in this comic. Spotlights are one-shot issues that focus on one particular Transformer, although quite often others will appear in the story. The first spotlight is Blur, and sees him make his choice in the upcoming war. A champion in the races, Blur doesn't concern himself with politics, and is unaware of the rise of the Decepticons. But when they shut down the race arena because of Megatron's attacks, Blur is left empty, with his sole purpose taken away from him. Starscream appears to him and asks him what he really wants, trying to get him to join the Decepticons using tactics that appeal to Blur's ego, promising him power and followers if he joins their cause. Not caring, Blur speeds off and runs into a conflict between the Autobots and the Decepticons, where he sees Optimus Prime tending to a dead Transformer that was killed by a Decepticon. Blur knew this Transformer, his name was Piston, and he was one of Blur's techs in the race arena. Optimus asks Blur what he wants, just like Starscream did, and he still plays to Blur's ego, but this time instead of using glory to feed it, he uses morality, asking him what he truly loved about the races and what he really wants. Is it something as shallow as applauding crowds and glory, or is it something more, knowing that they're cheering because he's inspired them to reach new heights? This resonates with Blur, and he speeds off straight into a group of Decepticons, including Starscream, and attacks them hit and run style, and the comic ends with Blur racing off happy that he's made a difference. It was a good story, and I liked how it showed that in the early days of the war that people could easily dismiss it by simply burying their heads in the sand. The art was okay, but a bit basic for my tastes. It reminded me of the kids' Spider-Man comics my mum used to buy me when I was a little kid. It's just very basic. Even though Megatron Origins could be difficult to work out what was going on sometimes, I much preferred the style in that to this. The next spotlight is Cliffjumper and follows the Autobot as he crash lands on an alien planet and befriends the young girl and her baby brother, and the comic mostly serves as an exposition dump, with the girl asking questions about the Transformer and his world, and Cliffjumper answering. It was a good way to get things across to the reader about the politics of Cybertron without making it a big event like Megatron Origins. After a while, the Decepticons come looking for Cliffjumper, and when they take the girl and her brother hostages, he takes out a big group of them guerrilla style. Then when the lead Decepticon explains to the little girl that Cliffjumper will let her die because she's what the Autobots call acceptable losses, Cliffjumper surrenders. Unfortunately, the Decepticons are still the bad guys, so the lead Decepticon shoots the girl and her brother, but Cliffjumper jumps on them to protect them, but it's not enough, and while they do survive and Cliffjumper takes them to hide them and return to beat the Decepticons, when he comes back the girl dies from her injuries. A sad Cliffjumper finds her little brother a new family to live with, then leaves the planet on the fallen Decepticon ship. I liked this one. It was a very quick read, but it was good to see how the war for Cybertron is heating up from different angles, and seeing how the Decepticons don't really think of themselves as bad guys, more like the Autobots, but just honest about themselves. This matches Megatron Origins in the way they aren't just bad guys for the sake of it, they're people who have legitimate grievances and feel the need to fight back against what they perceive to be oppression. And in this case, the whole reason they chased Cliffjumper to this planet was because he'd infiltrated their base and killed 4 of the Decepticon guards and their commander. So they really do have a reason to hunt him down, and he's not as innocent as he would like to believe. He's on the right side, but is he innocent? That's the other thing this comic did well. It showed that in war, it's very rarely black and white, that usually it's a case of grey, and in this instance, no one was truly innocent. The art was okay, it was a very Japanese inspired style, better than Blur but not as good as Megatron Origins, but it was a pretty quick story so I wasn't looking at it for too long. Shockwave is the next spotlight, and I liked how this tied in with the main series. In this case, there's a lot of lore explained that will help bolster the last story in this book, which is Infiltration, as well as the first story in the next book, which is Stormbringer. The issue starts with Shockwave as he realises Cybertron is doomed because of how he predicts the way the war for Cybertron will play out, and to better help himself in the future, he creates a project called Regenesis, something we will hear about later on in the book. Regenesis is Shockwave's plan to grow an isotope of Energon on different planets, including Earth, so that when the time comes, he will have the resources everyone wants, and he knows that the person who has something everyone wants is someone who has leverage and in turn can control events the way he sees fit. He sends this Energon out to various planets, including Earth, and when he travels here to ensure the Energon is growing properly in the atmosphere, some Autobots arrive in a ship, seeking revenge on him for a previous battle that wasn't shown in the comics. The Energon growing has affected the atmosphere and causes any Transformers in their humanoid state to freeze up if they stay in that mode too long, just like in Beast Wars. So the Autobots scan the Earth for animals suitable to their needs and take that form as their secondary transformation, and when we see them attack Shockwave, they transform into Dinobots and they look awesome. It's exactly how Beast Wars started. They even look like the same Transformers. Even in their humanoid transformations, they look like they jumped right out of the Beast Wars cartoon because of the way they transform differently, like having shells for their chest rather than a massive block of machinery, and it's spot on. Shockwave even mentions the Predacons, and in the show they were the descendants of the Decepticons, whereas here they're a specific task force that answer directly to Megatron, so they're not the same, but it's nice that they've been included in the same issue as the Dinobots. They attack Shockwave, who massacres them, then orders their ship to fire on his location, which buries him and the others in molten lava. At the end, we see Bludgeon sending a transmission to Megatron informing him that Shockwave has gone missing, and Megatron orders him to find out what happened to him and what he was working on, and this leads straight into the events of Soundwave, which is in this volume, and Stormbringer, which is in the next volume, and in that story we'll see Bludgeon carry out these orders, so this is another piece of story and lore that helps bolster another story in the series, and I really like when everything is connected like that. The last page of the comic shows some archaeologists digging in Nevada, and one of them excitedly gets the other one to look at his discovery, which turned out to be Shockwave's hand. I liked Shockwave. It's an excellent one-shot that fits in perfectly with the main series and explores background events that led up to what we see in the main series, and people love these comics because it's a new continuity that draws off the original Gen 1. And as someone who watched Beast Wars and Beast Machines every Saturday morning on SMTV Live, I love that they've brought in the Predacons and the Dinobots, even keeping the reason why they had to become dinosaurs the same. Something this story does very well is show how long the war for Cybertron really went on for. We don't know exactly how long before this Megatron Origin took place, but we know that Shockwave arrived on Earth while the crust was still molten, and we see it transform into an icy atmosphere, then plant life appears, then the dinosaurs die. So we know that the war has been going on for at least as long as the Earth has existed, which is obviously a very long time. The art was good, I liked it in this one, no complaints whatsoever. It was a great mix of moody and action. Nightbeat is the fourth Spotlight and follows the Transformer as he tries to uncover the mystery of a piece of Cybertron's ancient past. A dealer in rare and valuable artifacts called Kraken offers Nightbeat a flight recorder found on the planet Gorlum Prime, and it's valuable because it comes from one of the first arcs, great ships the Transformers launched 6.2 metacycles ago, which I think is meant to be the equivalent of 6.2 million years, but it could be billion, who knows, in order to chart space between the Cybertronian quadrant and the Benzuli expanse. The ship was lost in time, however, and while Nightbeat feels some trepidation in attempting to uncover such a great mystery, he's a slave to his programming and can't resist the mystery, so down the rabbit hole he goes. When he rendezvous with Kraken on his ship, he finds him dying, and his last words are, "There's a hole in the world." Nothing else has been taken from Kraken's ship, just the flight recorder, so Nightbeat follows the only lead he has and heads to Gorlum Prime. We don't see much of it, but there's enough there to see that the humanoids of the planet have reached the stage both evolutionary and technologically to start merging with technology. I thought this was interesting because we can kind of see our potential future in the people of this planet. We use cybernetic implants for things like prosthetic arms, and in the last 20 years, that technology has increased exponentially, with chips that can now access devices a reality, albeit an unreachable one for now because of how expensive it is. I liked seeing Nightbeat's reaction to the stage of their evolution too, questioning whether Cybertron was once like this, whether the Transformers had started out as a biological life that had evolved somehow into the technological beings they are now, and it may seem odd to see him pondering that option, but the history of the early civilization of Cybertron has been lost for a long time, so nobody really knows. Nightbeat heads to one of the planet's excavation sites hoping to find the place the flight recorder came from, and when he does, he's met with an underground cavern filled with a vast sea of what looks like liquid metal, and he initially thinks this is what Kraken meant by "there's a hole in the world," but upon closer inspection he realises the true meaning of the words. It's a portal to another place. As Nightbeat examined the portal, 4 Transformers appear, and as he tries to communicate with them, 2 more form out of the liquid, T-1000 style, to try to ambush him. There's a chase through the tunnels, but eventually they catch him, and the next thing we see is Nightbeat waking up, held down to a medical table, with someone inserting a cerebral implant into his head, calling him an emissary and promising that when the time comes they will call for him and he will know what to do. So he's clearly become somebody's sleeper agent. The question is who? The story cuts to Nightbeat in his ship looking for a good mystery, completely unaware of the experience he endured during the whole story when he's summoned by Optimus Prime to head to Earth, and the last thing we see is the screen saying a carrier wave was received, and presumably this is the wave needed to activate Nightbeat. It was a good story, and since I'm a noob when it comes to Transformers apart from the movies and Beast Wars / Machines, I have no idea who these other beings are. Are they Transformers from the first arc? Or are they what the Transformers found as they travelled through the Benzuli expanse? It's a mystery I'm looking forward to exploring in a future arc, because there's no way they set up such a good threat and mystery only to not follow it up. The story is written in a crime noir style, but I think it falls a little bit short because of the art style. Crime noir goes hand in hand with darker, moodier colours, but this has been drawn in quite a bright and colourful way, and it's a bit of a mismatch in my opinion. Think about any classic 40s style detective film, no matter when it was made, and you always have that moody, almost black and white look to it. Look at the beginning of Bioshock Burial at Sea, when Booker's in his room and Elizabeth walks in. It's almost black and white because it's so dark. Being out in the sunlight with lots of colours just doesn't mix well with crime noir because they're completely opposite tones. Think how tonally mismatched Resident Evil 5 was because it was out in the sunshine, but it was a horror game and you're in the right kind of ballpark. I did enjoy the comic though, the story was great. I love how they set up an entire future arc in one shot, in just a couple of pages in fact, and the art was fine, just mismatched. Hot Rod Spotlight is up next, and I'd been wondering when he was going to get some time to shine. Bumblebee may be super famous now thanks to the movies, but Hot Rod was the car transformer everyone knew when I was a kid. The story focuses on Hot Rod heading to a Decepticon prison planet to free one of his Autobot comrades called Dealer. As he works his way into the prison, we see him thinking about how the prisoner ended up there. He feels guilty because he lost him on a mission to steal something called the Magnificence. It was Hot Rod's mission, and some of the hollow matter projectors they used malfunctioned, leading to the capture of Dealer and him feeling guilty, which eventually leads to him heading to the prison to rescue him. Hot Rod finds him in a weakened state, puts a stolen Decepticon shield on him to power him up, and together they escape. As Hot Rod starts to feel the guilt lifting, Dealer makes a call to someone in secret. It turns out he's a secret agent for the Decepticons, and he sabotaged the hollow matter projectors himself so he would be captured, knowing Hot Rod would come back for him. He knows Hot Rod thinks he owes him one now, and hopefully in time he'll reveal the location of the Magnificence so he can steal it for the Decepticons. You see, his name isn't Dealer, it's Double Dealer, which has to be the best wordplay I've heard in the entire Transformers franchise ever. The art was fine, a bit more on the kiddie side, but the story was good and the reveal at the end did catch me off guard. The last spotlight in the book is Soundwave, and the last time we saw him was at the end of Megatron Origins, the first story in the book, when he stole Ratbat's spark. At the end of Shockwave's spotlight, we know he'd created a way to grow more energon on planets other than Cybertron, and we also saw Megatron order Bludgeon to find out what Shockwave was working on before he went missing. This spotlight follows on directly from that, because while we didn't see it in Shockwave's spotlight, in this we see that immediately after Megatron ordered Bludgeon to carry on Shockwave's work, he ordered Soundwave to spy on him. So we see Soundwave, mostly in his boombox form, spying on Bludgeon's operations, and it's quite interesting because it perfectly sets up the Stormbringer arc in Volume 2. On Earth, Bludgeon has sent out a team of human drones to excavate. This is the Ultra Energon we saw Soundwave farm in his spotlight, and now millions of years later, it's ready for harvesting. Soundwave offers not to report anything to Megatron if he gets a cut, but Bludgeon isn't having any of it, and a big fight ensues, resulting in Soundwave being stuck in boombox form and a volcano erupting, trapping him and Laserbeak in lava. I guess this is the point where Bludgeon heads to Cybertron for the Thunderwing story, and a year later, in 1985, we see someone from a group called Skywatch dig up the undamaged form of Laserbeak from the rock that was once lava, and in 2007 we see two kids looking in a pawn shop window calling something classic, and then we see it's Soundwave, who somehow got free of the lava and ended up among humans. I really liked this story and I love how it sets up Stormbringer, but I'd already read that before reading this, and I think a lot of people who read this in order might forget about this story by the time they get to Stormbringer. It was very well done though, and I particularly loved how it linked so many stories together. The art was good too, somewhere between kiddie and adult, but still enjoyable. The final story in the book is Infiltration, a 7-issue series which consists of 6 main issues and a slightly shorter issue 0, and if you removed all the horny teen angst from the Transformers movies, this is pretty much what you'd have left. It follows 3 kids, Verity, Carlo, Hunter, Don't Call Me Onion, Onion, and Jimmy Pink, as they happen to come across an Autobot ambulance called Ratchet, and all 4 of them end up being chased by the Decepticons because of some information Verity has on a PDA which she stole from someone since she's a bit of a street rat. The Autobots hold the kids in their crashed spaceship, and when they examine the datapad, it shows that the Decepticons are in infiltration mode, the name for their way of taking over the planet by infiltrating and destabilising governments from the inside, as well as the location of 2 of the Decepticons' hideouts. Ratchet knows which one is active because before he took the kids back to the Autobot base earlier, he followed the signal and saw the Decepticon base was active, so they decide to investigate the other one first. It was really cool when the kids go down the bunker to see if they can find out why the Decepticons abandoned it, and they split up and Verity finds this Cybertronian tree, all metal, and instead of flowers it seems to have pods, and she opens one up and finds a dead general's body in there. which ties into the infiltration part of the story. And shortly after that, you know shit's about to hit the fan because she literally just happens to come across Megatron hiding out in the bunker. It was one of the coolest moments in the book, followed by the moment when the shit actually hits the fan as Megatron breaks out from underground in a full page spread Superman style, fist up in the air and everything. It looked awesome, and at that point you just knew shit got real. I thought it was tastefully done because up till that point there had been no Optimus Prime and no Megatron and no mentions of them, but rather than using the overused main characters, Simon Furman went with a more subtle approach that led up to their introductions, and it worked because rather than being yet another Optimus versus Megatron story, this one relied on telling a story that focused on people and the Transformers, just like in the movies. Of course, since Megatron was hiding on his own, bad guy can only be Starscream because, let's face it, if the story isn't Megatron being the bad guy, or a random new giant Transformer being the bad guy, it's always Starscream. That's just what he does in Transformers. When there's no story to tell, it's just, oh, Starscream betrayed Megatron. Apparently Starscream had found a new Energon ore called Energon 13, which is the Energon isotope Shockwave planted on Earth billions of years ago, and Starscream pumps himself up with it, which makes him more powerful, similar to Bane in Batman, and he goes out to fight Megatron, who just obliterates him. Honouring the pact about not interfering with the humans, the Decepticons head back to their hideout and the Autobots go back to theirs, and that's pretty much the end of the infiltration arc, although we do see somebody spying on the Autobots as they head back to their lair. Apparently someone called the Machination wants the Transformers, presumably for their tech, so we'll see where that goes in Volume 2. Something I thought was really interesting was when Blitzwing said when they did what they did at their first secret bunker, they stopped being Decepticons. When I read this in the Premiere Collection, I didn't know what it meant, but I didn't feel lost at all. Instead, it made me wonder. However, since this is supposed to be in chronological order, I'm at a loss for what they did at their other base. Like, what did they do? Maybe somebody will talk about it in the future and we'll find out through exposition. However, it's similar to how in the Transformers movie, the war between the Autobots and the Decepticons had already started and left you wondering about things, but not in a bad way. Like, I wanted to know more, but not frustrated at lack of explanation. It was a good story, and it's the first big event in the Transformers comic where the world becomes aware of their existence, outside of the Machination group, of course. I thought it had good pacing, and the two coolest moments in the story for me were both Megatron's. First, when Verity inadvertently stumbles across him in his secret hideout, and the way he's been drawn and the angle her neck is at as she looks up at him really does show off the sheer size of him. He's like a skyscraper. Well, maybe not a big skyscraper, a little skyscraper. The second is a little bit later when he breaks out straight through the earth in the full page spread, and it just looks so awesome. That's the moment you know this story went from being a good Transformers story based around the general idea of Transformers and humans to being a full-on awesome story. It also sets up the war on Earth really well with all the players in place. Decepticons causing trouble, Megatron leading the Decepticons, Autobots ready to defend. Optimus Prime arrives on Earth on literally the last page of the book, so Megatron and Optimus are leading the Decepticons and the Autobots respectively, and everything is there and the human race is caught in the middle. I think this is as good a start as anyone can hope to get when diving into a brand new Transformers universe. Overall, I enjoyed the book. I really enjoyed it. I love how the stories mostly link together, creating this rich tapestry of backstory that enhances the main story. I love another franchise, and I really wish the people writing those stories treated it the way Simon Furman treated this Transformers series. It's like the main stories, like Megatron Origins and Escalation, are episodes of a TV show, and the spotlights are like webisodes. There are also two stories that have been set up very well in this book. The first is the most obvious one, with the war for Cybertron taking place on Earth and the humans getting involved. And I love how throughout the book we see various discoveries of Transformers on Earth at different times. Skywatch discovers some in 1984, but there are others in 2006 and 2007. And there's also the Machination. There's lots of people throughout history discovering and knowing about the Transformers, and it's all going to come out at some point. There's also the story set up in Nightbeat's story where he comes under control of a group that may or may not be current Transformers, or even Transformers at all. They could be aliens from the Benzuli Expanse, they could be the original Transformers from the first arc, or they could be something from another dimension. Whatever they are, I look forward to seeing that plot unravel. And trust me when I say the Stormbringer arc has been set up perfectly in this book by a couple of stories. I've read Stormbringer and these prequels to it are perfect, absolutely perfect. I think the art varies drastically throughout the book, ranging from overly kiddie art that would be at home in a comic aimed at a 5-year-old to dark and moody like in Megatron Origins, although the lack of detail caused by thick lines and muddy colours oversteps the mark for my taste. Dark and moody is fine, if you don't have to struggle to work out what it is you're looking at. It's a good book and I'm looking forward to reading volume 2, and I can see from this book alone why this series is so beloved by so many Transformers fans.